So picking up the narrative of man's confrontation with an existential conundrum in yet another philosophical disquisitional expansion, part 3 in a 3-part set on absurdism, we will begin the current examination at the point of man's engagement with absurdity. God is already dead. Hence, the possibility of finding purpose set forth by a higher power is no longer an option, and now man faces the prospect of a vast impersonal universe that doesn't supply any meaning to a human mind. According to a sort of collective composite derived from a synthesis of various philosophers' contributions to the subject, the explorer's clash with the absurd will ultimately lead to one of 3 choices: death, fantasy, or recognition. Choosing death is ultimately inconsequential because all it amounts to is the termination of an already mortal character. But this choice would amount to a failure on the spiritual path, which is the loss of the whole game. As really, that's all there is to do here in this existence. Everything else is masturbation. To awaken is the only real objective here. This is when one utilizes everything at his disposal towards the highest ideal. This is using the puzzle pieces to complete the puzzle, as opposed towards perversions contrary to their purpose, like as use as ego amplifications, or in other such similar masturbatory applications. So even though death or not, it doesn't really matter. And despite there being an infinite eternity to go through detachment from identification, it must eventually be faced. Why delay any further? Hiding behind death won't be of any assistance. If one seeks to uncover the truth of existence, one doesn't take the easy way out. To master attachments, there needs to be engagement. And choosing death is avoiding the engagement. To transcend is a focused endeavor of purpose and discipline, and opting for a premature death hardly qualifies as transcendence. It must be willful. Now, fantasy is a tactic of sugarcoating the absurd with some sort of mental abstraction, wherein one tells themselves a preferable story about the meaning behind their experience, which, if done before lucid clarity can be established, will insulate the explorer from the truth of absurdity. This has been described as philosophical suicide, and it may be apt, as this ends an explorer's inquiry. And if an explorer has not discovered the truth and is only courting some notion of a conditional truth, their inquiry should still be ongoing. There's nothing wrong with existentialism after one has confronted and recognized absurdity and then discovered the truth of it. To do so beforehand is blind masturbation. And then there's the recognition of the absurd. This is when one enters the twilight zone and is cognizant of it. This is absurdism. Now, it's been suggested that in order to uphold the integrity of absurdism, one must never do anything to interfere with the recognition that one is living in a universe without objective meaning. But this recognition isn't a recognition of the truth. Thus is yet even more delusion. Therefore, it is an assertion dependent on a significant degree of false assumptions. There is no one actually existing to recognize a so-called universe without meaning. And there is no universe without meaning actually existing either. Not existing in the way you've been conditioned to understand existence. That is, a mind-independent material configuration that has some objective location beyond the screen of images in the mind. Does that sound like a place to set up camp? With an idea that the circumstances on the screen of images in the mind has some kind of reified location external to the screen of images in the mind? Sounds like a delusion to me. What benefit is there to maintaining recognition of the Twilight Zone if it isn't the truth? So no. The idea isn't to enter the Twilight Zone and then devote oneself to sustaining the cognizance of the Twilight Zone at all times as an existential cause. The idea is to enter the Twilight Zone and then set to work in finding out the truth of the Twilight Zone. There's a little more to existence than just perpetual free fall down the rabbit hole. Believe it or not, there's additional work to be done after the cognizance of the absurd. But isn't this all just a question of one's plight with the knowledge that there is no objective meaning in the universe? Oh, it's just that, huh? Those are words that should never be coming out of a philosopher's mouth. And it's a question of something in a universe, is it? Well, that may sound good on its surface, only it's not even a matter of a universe. This is taking the literal approach, without consideration from the meta perspective. This is why most do not understand that the realization will not involve attaining elusive knowledge, but rather will be a matter of clearing away the delusion that is shrouded over the mind. So, stated more accurately, it's more of a case of there being no objective meaning and mind-dependent illusion. Meaning is a strictly subjective utility, and it's not an aspect on the screen of images. It's purely an abstraction. Same with value, reason, purpose, and narrative. These abstract tools have one utilization when applied towards delusion, but take on a whole different application when approached post-enlightenment. So, hence, one can invent meaning as with existentialism, or find meaning in naturalism, or construct philosophies such as the precepts of absurdism all they want. But if one has awakened, there is no attachments to any of this. There is no doer. There is no doership. Question. Hold on, Metasage. If we have to reject the external universe, does that also mean that we have to reject the image of you that seemingly comes from an external source? Or is that external source actually an illusion? Answer. External source is illusion. You don't have to necessarily reject an image. It's the idea of this image being an external phenomena that must be rejected. Remember, there is no such thing as objective. Thus, the stream of sense perception isn't conveying information indicative of phenomena that is independent of the mind. It is mind-dependent. This means the mind is the context of the phenomena, as opposed to the idea that the context is some spatial locality of vacant space. That's just an idea, dig? Externalism is an abstraction. Question. I don't think I understand. Do you truly not believe in matter at all? If you believe in consciousness without believing in matter, then isn't that essentially believing in a soul? I can accept that there isn't intrinsic absurdity, which is what I interpreted when you said there is no absurd man. But just that absurdity is another perspective to take while accepting that. Of course, it's not fundamentally true, since no perspective really is, because there is no intrinsic truth. Do you agree? Also, if not to live in the face of absurdity, or living just for the sake of living, then why do you carry on, and in particular, make these videos? Is it just for the happiness it brings you? That's the best rationale I've come up with for myself, besides just possibly a rational fear of not existing. Answer: no. Matter isn't distinguished as anything foundational, as reality isn't a physical phenomena. And it's funny that you ask if I believe in matter or consciousness, as that's all these aspects boil down into: conceptual beliefs. They have nothing to do with reality. So does this mean that I believe in a soul instead? Same. The soul is yet another conceptual belief. Concept, object, abstract, or solid, there isn't anything within the dream that is substantial. It's all part of the same illusory fabric. But it's what you state next that needs extra clarification, as I hear this so often, and it's way long overdue for correction. You state that you can accept there isn't intrinsic absurdity, and that there is no intrinsic truth. But this is getting the whole thing backwards. There is no extrinsic absurdity, and there is no extrinsic truth. So no, I don't agree. I'm not sure why everyone says this all the time when referring to reality. It's probably due to a misidentification of what reality is. You know, externalism. The delusion. The abstraction superimposed over reality. This is why people will say things like, there's no intrinsic meaning in the universe. This isn't about a universe, as a universe isn't the context. So it can't actually be technically correct to say there isn't any intrinsic meaning in the universe. There is intrinsic meaning, but it isn't in a universe. A universe is a story told about a stream of sense perceptions. So if anything, a universe is in intrinsic meaning. It's all intrinsic, as there is no such thing as objective. And so as to your final query about why carry on existing, there doesn't have to be a reason. It already is. Why do I make these videos? Not for any reason. Is it to gain some state called happiness? Not for any reason. I don't have to search for an ideological justification because it already is what it already is. What's some kind of mathematical abstraction gonna do to make it otherwise? It can't be a fear of non-existence because non-existence is non-existent. There is only here and now. Need we ask why? The river needs never to ponder the reason why it flows. It just flows. Those that go with the flow, go with the flow. Those that push against the flow, get drowned.